Greetings, spiritual pilgrims. We are recording in my kitchen again today, and we'll be recording here for probably 2 or 3 more weeks. We had some scheduling conflict on getting the studio completely finished, but it's on its way.
Dr. Frankenstein.
And we look forward to that. I'd like to welcome you, if you're new, to Remnant Church's Midweek Refuel. This is a spiritual pit stop to help you make it through the entire week. Remnant Church seeks to make disciples through the preached word, the study of those who came before, and by making the ancient paths clear to those that would travel the narrow road. And don't the ancient paths scare progressives? If these are a blessing to you, be sure to subscribe and hit that like or rumble button. And if you ever wished for a simple way to build the church, then slapping that like button or that rumble button helps us to reach a much wider audience. So I thank you for doing that. This week we run up against the wall, or to put it more precisely, we run up against the chasm. We have traveled far on our journey with John. We have heard the siren's call from the first encounter there in the garden when he was a little boy, and then later on in his early adult life with media halfways and the like. And we have eluded the insanity of the city of Zeitgeist and the city of Claptrap, only to be confronted with this, a chasm which will not yield a traversable path to our destination. This is quite the dilemma we're at.
Hi, you've reached the White family. Please leave a message.
In order to fully appreciate this reading, you must have found yourself peering over this dread bottomless pit with your own eyes at some point with your own soul. If you do not understand this passage that we're reading, then pay special attention to it. It is a signpost you have yet to see yet, but if you continue your journey, you will run across it. If you do not understand this passage, then you need to continue seeking until you find it. For there is no other way to the island of your dreams than across this uncrossable, unforgiving pit. And those that have found it, whether they have crossed it or not, will feel the hair on the back of their necks rise as John peers over, for not everybody that encounters it crosses it. For only fellow travelers understand the unthinkable horror that this pit represents. And you understand that horror the same if you butt up against it or if you find your way across. To me, this pit is more devastating than Bunyan's Apollyon. In many ways, it's the same battle, and I find the battle with Apollyon to be full of a pathos that I enjoy. But this one, intellectually, I enjoy more, if that makes any sense. So Apollyon in the Bunyan story always represented sanctification to me. And while this moment always also feels that way, it is interesting to note that Lewis's John never has the same encounter with the cross that Bunyan's Christian has. John never has the pack fall off of his back. It all seems to happen in a sequence from childhood to this other period. So when you hear people talk about the crisis or the evolution of sanctification and salvation in many ways, they are crises and they are paths. When I was saved, my mother told me that my salvation account sounded very similar to her sanctification account. And I later in my journey had another crisis, which I call my sanctification moment, which sounds very much like her sanctification moment. But like my salvation moment, it shared many of the same death and life archetypal constructs as the redemption moment did. Yet it was different. Different in kind, different, but not different in flavor. After spending a lifetime of trying to give voice to both my own experiences and having read and borne witness to many others telling their spiritual stories, the differences between salvation and sanctification are vast, and yet they are also blurred. They are two crises, and yet they also overlap in a seemingly inseparable way. They are different bites from the same fruit. I don't know if that's the best way to put it, but it's the way I'm going to put it. They happen in some people so swiftly, the two crises, that the two cannot be distinguished. I've come to believe this after hearing testimony from people. While in other boneheads like myself, unfortunately, I found the process can take decades or more. I believe in two crises. It took two crises for me. I believe it takes two crises for everyone, whether they realize it or not. I believe in two great spiritual lessons that must be learned to fully realize yourself in the kingdom of Christ with the full privileges and rights given to you. The death that's being talked about here, you do not receive the full armor and the full rights and privileges until this moment. That is my belief. But having said that, I believe in two moments. I also believe that some hearts are much faster spiritual learners than myself. And if they blur the two, that's okay. I've come to that conclusion after all these years. If I have any skill in verbalizing my own spiritual walk, it is not because I was born with a spiritual silver spoon in my mouth. It is because I am so dense and boneheaded that I had to suffer more words to get me there than many people do. What am I trying to say? I'm trying to say this. Every story that I have heard is slightly different. Every salvation and every sanctification story I've heard are slightly different, but all of them have the same guidepost and mile markers along the way. It is a well-trodden, narrow path that can be discerned clearly, both in the works of Lewis, Bunyan, but also in my own life and the life of the saints that I have encountered in this world. I've heard this moment talked about by the Baptists, even though they don't use the word sanctification, and I have heard it used by some of the saints of the Catholic Church. And I know that Catholic word brings up a whole lot of feelings for a lot of people, but I believe that there were many Catholics that did walk this path at times in history.
What happened? Let's go.
The only difference I have found in the memory of the saints and their recollections of this has to do with the time dilation in which they experienced it. And that's also the same difference I find between individuals that I have interviewed and witnessed to, and they've borne witness to me. For some, this narrow path is long and adventurous, to say the least. But to others, such as the thief on the cross, the path was short, because the time dilation of his life came crashing down on him in the last moments. The thief accepted the penalty of his sin. The thief accepted the charges of his sin. The thief announced his guilt at being a sinner, and he also announced Christ's guiltlessness. And it's really all it takes. But really getting there in your mind is quite a thing, because it takes a whole lot of knowledge of the self and a whole lot of looking into the eyes of Christ as he hangs there. And in those few short moments, I believe he experienced not just salvation, but also sanctification, which structured his repentance and his confession. In a world where you are told that you have even the right to not be offended, well, then the offense of the cross is abhorrent to you and to your culture. And it's meant to be abhorrent to you because you need a loud wake-up call. Not only abhorrent, but the sentence of death that it declares over you is final, and it is damning. Jesus didn't belong up there, and you put him there anyway, to put it bluntly. I once taught a Good Friday message, which is about the death of Jesus Christ and our culpability in that. And I had a lady in the congregation complain to others, not to me, but to others, that she could not, in good conscience, invite people to a church where the pastor was going to make people feel bad about crucifying Jesus. I know no other way to salvation. This I can say clearly and unjudgmentally. If you think that way, then you have not been carried across this particular chasm, and best be hitting an altar somewhere quick.
We deserve to die, for we are receiving the just punishment for our crimes. But this man has done nothing wrong. Jesus. Remember me when you come into your kingdom.
You are still dead in your trespasses, and you should get on your knees now and beg God to give you a fitting corpse with which to make the journey across this uncrossable pit. For only the dead make this journey alive. I have watched as people grab the pew in front of them in their moments of conviction and shame, and watched as the old man refuses to be put down. They shake as though a filthy spirit has control of them. Their eyes dart to and fro, or they stare defiantly at the preacher with a hate which screams, "I will not be dying today, shepherd." Meeting after meeting, I have walked someone along this crevice only to have them jerk me away from it and tell me that there is no way that Jesus meant this. There is no way that he really means me to die, is there? This is absurd. He loves me, you say. Why all the grim talk of chasms and death? Please turn on the Christian radio station and turn the channel to Olstein. Please do anything other than point at, describe, or even hint at the pit of death that must be crossed, or the cross of shame that must be borne.
Well, they were wrong then, weren't they?
And on page 170 of my copy, if you have the Wade annotated edition like I do, on page 170 of this fantastic account, I read these words creep from what it describes as an aged, appalling face, crumbling and chaotic, larger than human. So quite a frightful thing is encountering our hero today. Not only that, but this entity or non-entity dares beat its chest in pride as it declares to our frail hero, "The landlord's son who feared nothing feared me." And he is accurate. And the Garden of Gethsemane shows us the torture that Christ went through himself to make the decision. But once you conquer this fear, O child of the King, O prince and princess of the mighty throne, O mighty men of David and mighty women of Esther, come and gather round the cloud of saints to hear what courage truly sounds like. Jesus doesn't seem to have much time for people who don't confront this particular fear. Does he heal them? Yes. Does he love them? Yes, by all means. But ask yourself this, can he use them? No. And this is why Jesus was always walking away from some rich fool who thought he could follow Jesus and still sit at home with all their stuff. Surely Jesus means figuratively, you might say. Surely there will be some of me left after the surgery. Pastor, I came in here for you to fix my problems and the problem people in my life. I did not come in here for you to tell me that if I were truly dead, then I wouldn't have any problems. I know that when I'm dead, I won't have any problems, but I'll be dead. And if they would just let their prides, their egos, their rights to be offended fall down into the dirt and die, then they would experience something glorious. But few are those that truly find this path. Jesus himself said that there are few that find it.
I think it was Blessed Are the Cheesemakers.
What's so special about the cheesemakers?
Well, obviously, it's not meant to be taken literally. It refers to any manufacturers of dairy products.
See, if you haven't been going on, we'd have heard that, Big Nose. Hey.
And we need to make sure we understand what he means, because our souls are on the line. Why do we kid ourselves? Why do we present to a gullible public a spiritual path that fails to mention this smell of death, this small detail of the chasm of death, and the requirements of the cross of shame? I'll tell you why. Because preachers would have to make less money. They'd have to preach to fewer people, and they'd have to be willing to let those with large bank accounts walk out their doors in the knowledge that God funds them, not doctors, not lawyers, not politicians, and not mammon. You see, you cross this chasm, and money is just another satanic joke, another clown along the path. Cross this chasm, and no one can threaten you with death because that ship has already sailed. You hearing me? You see, you cross this chasm, and you will find life. This is a very serious business that the church should take back up as its modus operandi, not as something we display later in the game. We are the hook, and we are the bait in this fishing game. There is no other way. Church is not business as usual. Church is a very unusual business. Can you believe that the church was made to feel bad about offering to its people any experiences that they had not already experienced? Let me tell you a story. We were on vacation one year with my parents, and I was on the back porch reading a book. And I ran into a word for a piece of furniture that I'd never seen written down before. I'd probably heard it somewhere, but it's not a common word. Or at least it wasn't to me. I had heard it many times, but it was unfamiliar with its unique spelling. I even forget what the word is, to be honest with you. But I looked around and called out, "Hey, what does this spell?" Well, everyone got a good laugh that I didn't know what that word was. It was funny because I knew words like ontology and theosophy. So the laughter was a compliment, not a browbeating. But this common word had eluded me after all my reading. Mom came by and she whispered in my ear, "I've always loved that you aren't afraid to ask questions." Mom's always been very good to me. But many people today won't learn because they spend their time feeling shame at what they don't know and don't want it exposed that they don't know it. That's the shameful position. The rightful position is, I am ignorant of this and I need to learn it. If I may, that is the height of stupidity. Ignorance is fixable. I am ignorant on a lot of things. I'm ignorant on delta Y power transformations. Ask my father. But that doesn't mean I'm stupid. An engineer might think I'm stupid, but a theologian is going to love me or hate me. No lukewarm garbage here in this. Wanting to learn is the highest sign of intelligence. A sure sign of stupidity is the unwillingness to admit ignorance and move forward, because you stay there. In a world where even the hint that you may know something that you may not know something comes across as hostile and demeaning to our frail egos, how in the world do you lead someone not just to the chasm of spiritual enlightenment, but on across the chasm of death event itself? If people are too good to admit that they, with their own hands, nailed Jesus to the cross, they are definitely too good to deserve the death required of them to enter into spiritual maturity and spiritual grace. If you've made it this far, then I suppose that you have either already crossed this chasm, or you are trembling with an untold courage and are still creeping towards that ledge. Keep creeping, brother and sister. Keep going. There are islands beyond beauty on the other side of that chasm. If the church abandons this lesson to keep the rich people's money flowing through the church coffers, and if it adopts some other gospel to be preached, then you might as well abandon it all and join a club that will make you feel good for giving out of your abundance and staying ignorant. Because that spiritual sleight of hand was never welcomed or desired by my Lord Jesus Christ. He ran up against it, and when he ran up against it, they fell. If you are attending a church that does not preach the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ and the need for self-denial and saying no to yourself daily, then you need to leave that place and never look back, because death is coming for us all one day, true death. And if you have not faced him in the spiritually awake moments, then you will not rest in peace in the sleeping moments. In the words of the good man in black, Johnny Cash, there's a man going around taking names, and he decides who to free and who to blame. Everyone won't be treated all the same. There'll be a golden ladder reaching down when the man comes around. Best grab that ladder, especially now when the lines of battle are so clearly drawn before us. Turn, if you will, if you got the Wade edition, to page 165, and we'll read the 3 quotes that are here. Langland, written in a very old English, says, should never wet wext, boat wet first died, and other seeds also in the same wise, that been laid on la earth, ye lore as hit were, and thor the gret grace of God, of granded in earth, at last launceth up, whereby we live in el. Or, wheat could never grow unless it first died, and other seeds as well in the same manner, that are laid in furrowed earth, lost as it might appear, and through the great grace of God, from grain dead in earth, at last it springs up, whereby we all live. George MacDonald wrote, Ye will not sleep. If ye lie there 1,000 years until ye have opened your hand and yielded that which is not yours to give or to withhold, you may think you are dead, but it will be only a dream. You may think you have come awake, but it will still be only a dream. Open your hand, and you will sleep indeed. Then wake indeed. And an old police maxim, you may as well come quietly. Chapter 1. When John opened his eyes, the day was still far off, but there was light in the cave, as though from 100 candles. The hermit lay fast asleep by one wall of the cell as John lay by the other, and between them stood a woman, something like Reason and something like Mother Kirk, very bright. I am Contemplation, she said. Rise and come with me. You are not like the Contemplation that I know, said John. It is one of my shadows, whom you have met, said the lady, and there is little good in them and less harm, but rise and come. Then John rose, and the lady took him by the hand and led him out onto the ledge before the cave. And the night was still black with thunderous rain, but the lady and he were in a sphere of light, so that the raindrops, as they passed out of the darkness into it, became bright like diamonds in the center of the sphere and iridescent at the circumference. Held by the lady's hand, he crossed the chasm and passed up the glens of the mountains on the other side. When they had traveled a long way, and still the darkness lay everywhere, save where they trod, they came to the sea. And they crossed the sea also, gliding a little above the water, and the water also was dark until it reached their light, but within that it was blue, as though it lay in Mediterranean sunshine. But presently the surrounding darkness vanished away, and the drop of light in which they had journeyed entered an ocean of light and was swallowed up. The sky was visible above them, and it seemed to be early morning, for it was cool, and dew soaked their feet. And John looked and saw fields going up before him, and the light ran down as a river in the midst of the fields, singing with a voice like a river, but more articulate and very loud, too bright to look at. There were many people with them, and as John looked round upon the people, he saw that they were approaching some high walls and great gates. And at the shape of the towers clustered above him, a memory very deeply buried stirred in his mind, first sweet, then uneasy, then spreading through the pool of his mind and widening circles of dismay, till at last, with certainty inevitable, unbearable, there flashed before him the picture of those turreted crags seen long ago from Puritania at the summit of the eastern mountains, and he saw where he was, beyond the brook, where Uncle George had vanished, and the landlord's castle. The good, kind landlord with the black hole. He began to draw his hand out of the lady's hand. He could not get it free. She was leading him on to the castle gates, and all the crowd of people were moving on in the same direction with a sinister happiness on their faces. He struggled with contemplation and screamed, and with that and the struggling, he awoke. It was now pitch black in the cave. Only the quiet breathing of the hermit recalled to John where he was, and with the first return of the knowledge, he was already creeping out of the cave to dare the black night and the narrow ledge, to crawl the skin off his hands and his knees, to do and suffer anything so long as he was going back and not on. On in this direction, where the next turning might lead him into the heart of the adversary's power. The rain fell in torrents, and thunder echoed among the rocks, but the cool moisture on his back was better than the hot moisture on his forehead. He did not dare to stand up and walk, for the new terrors had not driven out the old, but rather joined with them in phantasmagoric harmony, so that all in one moment his inner eye saw the black hole full of the spiders and scorpions, the narrow ledge sloping horribly the wrong way, the drop into the darkness, and his own body bounced from crag to crag. The terrible face of Uncle George when the mask would not stay on it. And as the flashes came faster and the thunder followed faster on each flash, a new fear joined the dance, and in each flash the timeless, unforgettable sight of the cliffs lit up from end to end, gave a new edge to the old fear of climbing, and that again brought back the fear of Uncle George's face. So will mine look when I lie broken at the bottom of the gorge. Until at last, when the complexity of fears seemed to admit no increase, a sharp, commanding voice out of the darkness suddenly startled him with such a shock that he seemed not to have been frightened till then. "Back!" said the voice. John crouched motionless. From the balance of fears, he was not even sure that he could turn on this bit of the ledge. "Back!" said the voice, "or else show that you're the better man." The lightning tore open the darkness and flung it to again. But John had seen his enemy. It was Reason, this time on foot, but still mailed, and her sword drawn in her hand. "Do you want to fight?" she said in the darkness. John had a wild thought of catching one of the mailed ankles from where he crouched, but when he had a picture of Reason falling into the gulf, he could not get it clear of another picture in which he fell with her. "I can't turn here," he said, but the steel was at his throat, and turn he did. He shuffled along at a surprising speed, still on his hands and knees, till he had passed the cave again. It was no longer a question of plans or of ultimate escape. The hunted animal's impulse to prolong the chase kept him ragingly on the move. The flashes were growing rarer, and the star or two showed ahead. Then all of a sudden a wind shook the last raindrops fiercely in his face, and there was moonlight all about him. But he drew back with a groan. Within an inch of him he had seen a face. Now a cloud crossed the moon, and the face was no longer visible, but he knew that it was still looking at him. An aged, appalling face, crumbling and chaotic, larger than human. Presently its voice began. "Do you still think it is the black hole you fear? Do you not know even now the deeper fear of the black hole is but the veil? Do you not know why they would all persuade you that there is nothing beyond the brook, and that when a man's lease is out, his story is done? Because if this were true, they could in their reckoning make me equal to naught. Therefore not dreadful. Could say that where I am, they are not. That while they are, I am not. They have prophesied soft things to you. I am no negation, and the deepest of your heart acknowledges it. Else, why have you buried the memory of your uncle's face so carefully that it has needed all these things to bring it up? Do not think that you can escape me. Do not think you can call me nothing to you. I am not nothing. I am the being blindfolded, the losing all power of self-defense, the surrender, not because any terms are offered, but because resistance is gone, the step into the dark, the defeat of all precautions, utter helplessness turned out to utter risk, the final loss of liberty. The landlord's son, who feared nothing, feared me. "What am I to do?" said John. "Which you choose," said the voice. "Jump or be thrown. Shut your eyes or have them bandaged by force. Give in or struggle." "I would sooner do the first if I could." "Then I am your servant, and no more your master. The cure of death is dying. He who lays down his liberty in that act receives it back. Go down to Mother Kirk." John looked about him when next the moon shone. The bottom of the chasm was level far below him, and there he saw what seemed a concourse of dark figures. Amidst them they had left an open space, where there was a glimmer as of water, and near the water there was someone standing. It seemed to him that he was waited for, and he began to explore the face of the cliff below him. To his surprise, it was no longer sheer and smooth. He tried a few footholds and got 5 feet below the ledge. Then he sat down again, sick. But the kind of fear which he now suffered was cold and leaden. There was no panic in it. And soon he continued his descent. Galatians 2 tells us this. "For through the law I died to the law, so that I might live for God. I have been crucified with Christ, and I no longer live, but Christ lives in me. The life I now live in the body, I live by faith in the Son of God, who loved me and gave himself for me. I do not set aside the grace of God, for if righteousness could be gained through the law, Christ died for nothing. Call it ego death. Call it the second birth. Call it the disillusionment of pride. Call it whatever you like. But short of the grave, it is a living death that receives an eternal life. You must be born again. And to truly do that, a seed must be planted. And in order for a seed to be planted, the seed must die. That shell of a person that you thought was you, it has to be killed so that the real you can live. Listen to the words of the Master. Very truly I tell you, unless a kernel of wheat falls to the ground and dies, it remains only a single seed. But if it dies, it produces many seeds. Wouldn't you like your life to produce many seeds? As someone who has walked with him long enough to see these seeds sprout, there is no greater life mission or joy than to watch your death bring forth life at home, at church, and in the world around us. Now make sure to hit that like or rumble button and subscribe. It helps build this ministry and it helps propagate the good word. Godspeed.